My name is Dr. Richard Cho. I'm on the Peace and Justice Studies Executive Committee. It's a pleasure to briefly introduce our next speaker. Dr. Brian R. Waite is a professor of multicultural and bilingual education and language acquisition theories and methods, and the department chair of secondary and special education in the School of Education at UVU. At UVU, he also works as the director for global and intercultural academic programming. Originally from Texas and New Mexico, Dr. Waite has a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Texas at Austin in Spanish, a Master of Arts in Spanish Education from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and a PhD in Education with an emphasis in equity and cultural diversity, also from the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. If you've been following this conference, you might have gotten to my session and been like, I don't understand how this fits in. So I'm going to do my best in showing you kind of what my expertise and research has to do with the topic of this or theme of this conference, and hopefully it'll be entertaining to you. Before I get going, though, I wanted to make sure that everyone understands about an opportunity here at UVU. It is a program that was mentioned that I direct. So I have a couple different roles here. I'm a professor over in School of Education, but I also direct this program. It's called the GI program. Here at UVU, GI does not stand for gastrointestinal, stands for global, intercultural, and this is a really good opportunity for students that they can graduate with credentialing in working with diversity, essentially. So the program emphasizes globalization, how to work across cultures, how to be more effective in business or education or social work when working with people who just have a different background than you, different belief system. And every student on this campus has to have at least one G course in order to graduate. That's been a requirement since 2005. But there are a few other requirements in order to get the distinction that you can if you just Google UVU GI, it takes you to this page. There's an application form, and then there's requirements for this. You take a few G courses instead of just one. You participate in a co-curricular or a practicum, which it could be like a study abroad, or it could be just working in the community. And then you put this all together in a capstone course that you would take from me, and you can actually graduate. It's almost like a certification program where we have a lot of students that get this. They use it to complement the degree that they're working on here to make themselves more marketable. Anyway, I want to make sure that everyone knows about it because a lot of students don't have opportunities to find out about this program. So if working with diversity or globalization or intercultural in any way is something that you're passionate about, would like to graduate with some credentials in that, feel free to contact me. My contact info is at the bottom of this page. Or just Google UVU GI. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about today. As we go. So I titled this Multicultural Education, How to Implement Equity and Culturally Relevant Practices. We already got me. By the way, that's my family. Got to brag about them a little bit. They are all runners, and it's track season right now, so my voice is a little bit rough because we just had a track meet recently, so I have to deal with this every spring. You should feel very sorry for me. We're not going to do this, but I want you to just kind of think and reflect for a second in your minds. When asked to describe people that you either go to class with, let's say, or maybe work with, what would come to your mind? What characteristics would you use to describe people that you work with or people that you interact with? Just a couple seconds in your minds, think about what cultural characteristics or just what characteristics in general would you choose to come up with? And as you do that, I would ask you, and you're welcome to raise your hand if you do, how many of you thought about race or ethnicity when thinking about the people that you work with, a few people? How many of you thought about gender identity? Okay. What about world view, religion, or spirituality? Few people, okay? That one kind of is a little bit more prominent here for whatever reason. I don't know. But yeah, so about 90% of the time when I workshop people, and I ask them to think of someone who is culturally different than they are, about 90% of people default to skin color or race. But here in Utah County, for some weird reason, religion is like a quick second, right, of what comes to mind when thinking about difference. How many of you thought about sexual identity, sexuality, okay? What about learning preferences? Yeah, we got some professors in here that probably think about learning preferences, right? If you're not in teaching or education's not really your thing, you're like, what is a learning preference, or why would I even care about that when working with someone else? My students across the street over here, School of Education, I'm talking to them all the time about what are the learning preferences of your students and why should you care? Is it a professor's or a teacher's responsibility to know her students well enough to figure out how to be an effective educator, right? Do you have professors here at UVU that you feel care about you enough to know how you learn or how you prefer to learn before they start teaching you? How many of you thought about socioeconomics, or what we like to call SES? Couple people, okay, good. So my point here is that we tend to default when we think of difference to certain categories. And it could be based on our experiences, right? We might default to those things based on how we like to be identified, or how other people seem to identify us or categorize us, right? And we might project those on other people that we work with or that we're gonna interact with. So I'm gonna drop a little bomb on you right now. I am a, dun dun dun, wait for it, diversity trainer, okay? So this has a lot of different connotations and likes and dislikes to it. It becomes a very divisive thing. It was very much popularized in season 1 of The Office, in an episode called Diversity Day, where the corporate office sent a diversity trainer because there had been some racist jokes being relayed at work and people got offended, so they called corporate and they sent a diversity trainer. But over the past, let's say 5 or 6 years, diversity training, or however you want to call it, has gotten very interesting reactions, right? Some people who are in it or maybe do it, they're like, yeah, that's normal. That's something that I think about all the time and I like it. Other people may have had a bad experience with diversity training. There's a lot of approaches to diversity training that attempt to make people who may not, or who might identify as a majority culture, to make them feel guilty or make them feel what other groups might feel on a daily basis. And the diversity trainer wants them to go through that process. And so a lot of people get turned off on it and have a negative experience. But in my opinion and in my experience, talking about these issues has to be a safe space. We have to allow for each other to disagree. And that is where my connection into this conference comes. How do we have conversations with people who are different from us that are difficult? Right? How do we understand why we have the opinions that we have or the perspectives that we have, and be okay with the fact that other people have different ones, right? And so that's kind of where we're going to go today. Right from the start, I feel like it's important that you, us, me too, contemplate how the paradigm shift that happens with this. When you hear the word diversity trainer, do you tense up? Do you get defensive? Do you say, I hate that? Do you welcome it? Do you open your mind and say, wow, this is something interesting. I've never done it. I can't wait to learn. Where do you sit? Why would it be important to think about that and where you're at, where your feeling is? I think how we feel and how we can be aware of that feeling is super, super important. I don't know if y'all have been like outside recently, but we're kind of divided, okay? Politically, I would argue religiously, it's March Madness, so we can throw sports in there, right? There is a lot of division. And so much so that we have lost the ability to effectively and civically communicate with others, right? And be okay with being different. I believe social media, don't get me started on social media. I think it's the bane of all evil, but I think that it has really contributed to this lack of civility, right? When we communicate with people who are different. And so that's one of the things I just invite you to kind of reflect on and think about in your own life. Where do you believe that you are? How do you view those kinds of things? Are you open to those difficult conversations? When you talk to someone who is different from you, has a different opinion, comes from a different background perhaps, do you talk to that person with your rebuttal in mind while they're talking to you? Or do you authentically listen to them and try to understand where they're coming from so that you can be a better person because they're different from you? Right? Those are very different things. And I think that we have a problem with that in our society. Why is this important? Because I don't know if you've been paying attention, but our demographics are changing. Utah is a little bit behind the rest of the country. Big shocker. But we follow national trends. Okay, so the same trends of diversity and demographic changes that happen across the United States, Utah's a little bit behind in the numbers, but we follow those same trends. And we can see, if any of you are familiar with Pamela Perlick's work, she's an economist out of the U. She talks about 4 main things that are contributing to this changing demographics. Pamela Perlick says that 1, record number of immigrants. For some reason, I think in our society, we've got this notion that immigration is a thing of the past, that it's going to be quote unquote fixed or stop or something like that. I got news for you. No, it's not. We have record number of immigrants today than ever before. We are not in the first administration that has been talking about immigration and talking about it as if it's a problem and we need to stop it. It is as old as time, right? But we have today record number of immigrants coming to the United States. That's driving this demographic shift. We have the aging of the post-World War II baby boomer generation. We do not like to think about this, but the baby boomer generation is moving on. That generation was the most homogeneous racial and ethnic group to ever live in the United States of America. Prior to the baby boomer generation, much more ethnic diversity. Since the baby boomer generation, much more ethnic diversity. That generation, for whatever reason, I have my theories, but there's debate about it, is the most racial homogeneous group to ever live, and they're moving on. And they are leaving behind a much, much more diverse way of thinking and just the way that people identify, etc. We also have differential fertility levels and trends, and then life expectancy. People are living longer. People are living longer in Utah. For whatever reason, that used to not be the case. It was a relatively younger state up until around the 1980s, and we have since then people who are living a lot longer. And these changes are bringing this kind of diversity to Utah. Age, nativity. There are a lot more people who live in Utah that are not Utahns. That used to not be a thing. Prior to the 1980s, Utah was what's called a negative net migration state, meaning more people moved away from Utah than moved to Utah. Since the 1980s, we have seen that flip, and we have much more people moving to Utah, staying here, living here, than who are leaving. And we have, multiple reasons for that: industrial, job opportunities, etc. But because of that, we're seeing an increase in different cultures. It's bringing different native languages to our state, ethnicities, and socioeconomics, which is kind of interesting. Again, the 1980s, prior to the 1980s, Utah was a relatively middle-class state, not a ton of wealth, not a ton of poverty. But since the 1980s, we've seen that shift quite a bit, and we can just drive down the freeway. We can look at different sides of the road, and we can see that there's a bigger disparity there. So Pamela Perlick says this about these changing demographics. Youth of today are experiencing this increasing diversity while older generations might not have. The nation, she says, is in the midst of an extraordinary demographic transformation and embarking on a great multicultural experiment. She also says youth of today as adults will be asked to carry a greater demographic, and she uses a word that I don't like here, so I put in my own word, change, than the generation of their parents. And this is my favorite quote from Perlich: changes are cumulative and irreversible. So I've got news for you. If you thought this diversity thing was a fad and you were just going to wait it out, not going to happen. It is cumulative, meaning that it affects everything. You probably cannot get a job where diversity isn't going to be a thing. Diversity of either ethnicity or race, but definitely of worldview or perspective or politics, right? So, and it is irreversible. We're not going to go back. So we have to decide. Oh, hang on, one more before I ask that question. Just as a point of interest, 90% of the national growth to the United States between 2000 and 2030 is occurring in the southwest part of the U.S. Nevada and Arizona are getting the bulk of that, but we are right next door to both of those states. So we are seeing huge changes in that. The projections over the next 10 years of this little valley right here are very, very interesting. They predict first of all, growth like crazy here, but that growth will bring different viewpoints, worldviews, spirituality, race, language, etc. And so the question I have for you is, do you see this as a problem or an opportunity? And you could be real with yourself for a second. You know, I personally don't like to use the word problem with this. I would like to substitute it maybe with issues. Are there issues with these changing demographics? You don't have to answer that now, just in your head. What about the people that you work with? What's the scuttlebutt around the water cooler about all of our changing demographics, or focus on immigration or things like that? What about the general population? Think of maybe your grandmother or great aunt. Are they sitting around the Thanksgiving table going like, "Dude, man, I am so excited about all these changes that we're going through. It's awesome." Or are people anxious about it? Or do they think that's the problem of our country, right? How we think about that really drives those conversations that I was talking about before. What drives conflict among us? Why is it so difficult for us to have conversations with folks who think differently or who come from a different background? I will argue that a lot of this is because of culture. It's because of who we are, where we come from, and how we view the world because of it. In my classes, well, I'll talk about this in just a second. So why are the cultures of people that we work with, or students, fellow students, important for us to know? Think about how you would define culture. Again, just in your head real quick. What would you use to categorize culture if you had to come up with a definition? Social scientists argue about this. They have a lot of different definitions of how we look at culture, how we describe it. I personally like this one from Nieto and Bode. They say that culture consists of the values, traditions, worldview, and political relationships created, shared, and transformed by a group of people bound together by a common history, a geographic location, language, social class, religion, or other shared identity. I'm actually going to ask this question. Does anything stand out to you from this definition? Any words or concepts from anyone? You have permission to speak. Yeah. Yeah. So for those that are on the camera, he said the political affiliations was interesting. Does it make sense that you see it as part of a culture?
I think so. Like, for example, like, I was born here, my parents are Chileans.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people assume that, like Latinos and whole have the same, like, political
Right.
views and stuff.
Right.
But I can tell you that it's not the case. Like, for example, like, Chilean has different views on, like, economics or social things than Venezuela.
Absolutely.
But it is very different.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I really like this concept of shared identity, right? There can be an argument made that we have individual personal culture, but I would push back on that a little bit. I think that culture that we have is shared with groups of people, okay? But it changes based on the groups of people we're with, right? So like when I come to campus and I put on my professor clothes and I try to use big words and I come up here behind the microphone, I am a different person than when I go home and I talk to my kids. I might use the same tone because I do like to yell at them as well, but I use different words and I treat them differently. I am also a much, much different person when I'm at my kids' track meets. I am, believe it or not, louder there than I am here, okay? But I am still the same person. It's just that I'm sharing cultural identities differently with different people that I'm with. When we talk about conflict and we talk about trying to understand people who are different from me, one thing that is very frustrating to me is an assimilation type mindset of the United States of America. And it goes like this: when they, quote unquote, whoever that is, come to this country, they need to assimilate to the culture, right? And I'm always like, okay, first of all, let's stop right there, because which culture are you wanting them to assimilate to? What most people mean when they say that is, I want people to be like me. I don't want to have to learn a different language. I don't want to have to think differently spiritually. I don't want to have to change my lifestyle to fit who you are. So if you're going to come here, you need to adapt to me. But the problem is, we don't even have a culture. We are constantly going in and out of different cultures. Can you imagine a kid, for example, from El Salvador, let's just say, who moves in 6th grade to Alabama and lives in Alabama for a year and assimilates to the culture and then moves to Provo, Utah? You think there's going to be any issues, any difference? Absolutely, right? But they're going to come in there and be like, dude, I assimilated. How come everything's different now? But it's because we don't have one single culture, but we think we do, and we want other people to buy into that. And I think that that is a big cause of why we have different conflicts with other people. So, when I ask that question, when you think of someone who is culturally different from you, what do you think of? And 90% of my students or people I work with default to race or ethnicity. I like to put up this slide and problematize a little bit how we look at who we are, and because all of these characteristics make us view the world in different ways. As you look over this list of what I'm calling cultural identities, does anything stand out to you? Anything surprising to anyone? Or you wouldn't have thought about that before, maybe? Yeah. Body size. Yeah. So I have an interesting one on this one. So I was doing a workshop or a presentation at a conference a few years back, and I had this slide up, and we talked about it, and I finished the presentation, and I had a man come up to me at the end, and he was a pretty short man. And he said, you need to put height on that. And I go, well, I have body size. And he goes, no, height. You need height. Let me tell you my story. And he started going. And he started telling me about how he played basketball in high school. And he was always the shortest guy. And he would get made fun of. And he had a hard time with that. And he started telling, and I was just sitting there going, and you can see how impactful it was to me. I didn't put it up here. But it was incredible to sit there and listen to him and how important that was to him. But to someone else, they'd be like, no, that's not a thing. I don't care about that. But we know from research that the taller you are, the better likely you are to get a management type position job. Height matters in our society, right? So body size, and that can be a lot of different things. If you think of body size and the privileges that we have or don't have going into classrooms, sitting in desks, or even I could extend this a little bit to left-handed or right-handed people. Do we have any left-handed people in here? Okay. Do you ever find yourself where you're like, that wasn't made for me? Yeah, right? And so it's not maybe a big deal, but maybe there's a desk and you're like, well, there's only one desk that fits my side, right? Or whatever. Anything else that stands out to you? Great, thank you. So I put this one up a few years ago because I used to teach at Lake Ridge Junior High. Okay, this is just right up from campus there. I would go up there, teach some classes, and then I'd come back here. And what was interesting to me about Lake Ridge Junior High, my kids went to Lake Ridge, by the way. About half of Lake Ridge Junior High goes to Mountain View High School, and half of them go to Orem High School. It is as if these people are complete enemies, okay? Like you walk down the hall or you have them in class and they're like, oh, you're gonna be a Bruin? Well, I hate your guts. And I'm like, whoa, that seems extreme, right? But it is like divided based on, by the way, not even something that's going on right now, but what's about to happen, right? And I always am like, guys, do you realize if you lived on that side of the street, you'd be best friends? But because you live on this street, you're like, oh, I hate tigers. Can't stand you, right? I don't know if any of you have heard, there's two other institutions of higher education in this state, a little less well-known and rigorous as ours. One is BYU, the other is the University of Utah. You've heard of these places? I am not from Utah. When I moved here, I became aware of the rivalry that exists between the Utah Utes and the BYU people. It is borderline psychotic. Okay, I am from Texas, where, by the way, we actually do play college football, but that's for a different time. But when I moved here, I could not believe the rivalry. I have a friend. He is a die-hard University of Utah person. University of Utah. One day, I was down at BYU for a meeting or something, and this is a true story. He calls me, I'm talking to him on the phone. He's like, where are you talking to me right now? And I said, oh, I'm just down here at BYU for a meeting. And he goes, oh, really? Call me when you're not there anymore. Click. Hung up on me. Now, he was semi-joking, but semi-not because he hung up on me. Okay, and I was like, whoa, that is crazy. The reason I put school boundaries up here is because I think it is a simple way of showing that I believe we as humans go out of our way to find reasons to not like other people. We just make it up. If we can't figure out another reason, we're like, oh, what mascot do you like? Okay, well, then I hate you. Right? Like we find ways to divide ourselves from other people. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I am not saying, hey, everyone, stop watching March Madness and rooting for your team. That's not my point. But my point is if we do this with basketball mascots, how much more do we do it with people who worship differently than us or who speak a different language from us, right? We're obsessed with these differences and drawing lines. This happened a few years back in the state of Iowa. This young lady worked at a place called Zombie Burger, of all places, and this is what she looked like. She made national news. I actually watched interviews with her. She was a lovely young woman. She was bubbly, happy. This did not destroy her life, but this is what happened. After she served the table, the person in the tip line wrote, "Tips are only for normal-looking people," and did not leave a tip. Now, again, I've seen interviews with her. It didn't destroy her life. She was able to bounce back from this and move on. But how many of you have worked restaurants before and been a server? How big are tips to your livelihood? Everything. And this young person was denied her livelihood. Why? Because she just didn't fit that person's norm. That's where we're at sometimes in our society. Can you imagine in your own life, do we deny other people certain things because they're not like us or they don't fit our paradigm, right? Perspective is paramount. And I believe in working with conflict, talking with people who are different from us, understanding why we think the way we do is so vital. A lot of us are walking around not understanding why we think the way we do. We just think the way we do. We've always thought that, and we have in our mind created that that is right. The way I interpret the world is right. I think the way I worship is right. I think the way I voted was right. Everything that I have done is right. But the problem with that, y'all, is the inevitable corollary is that if someone did it different from me, they are wrong. And then sometimes we even take a step further and they become bad. They're a bad person for that, right? So I love this quote from Ananias Nin. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. This always makes me think of the proverbial accident in the street. Two cars run into each other. There's two witnesses that see it. The police show up and question the two witnesses, and inevitably, what is going to happen? Two different stories that they will relay to the police. Did they see a different accident? Nope. But they saw it based on who they are. And they both believe that they're right. And the problem is, neither of them are right. It's just a perspective. So if I show you this window, what is your perspective? Do you see it opening to the left or the right? You see it up? There's only one right answer, and you're wrong. I'm just kidding. How many of you can see both now? What about this box? Do you see it from like the top or do you see it from the side, this 3D box? What about this dot? Is it inside the box or on the outside of the box? What is your perspective? What if we go with this one? I love this one for perspective. These two dudes, when they get together, are going to fight it out, right? This one is going to be like, oh, this doesn't work. This one in the boat is going to be like, you do not want to go out there. It is horrible. And the one on land is going to be like, we got to get out of here now. And neither of them are right. But they're going to both think they are, and they're going to fight about it, right? But it's just based on their perspective. So terms are important and how we think about these things. We've talked a little bit about culture, and we've defined that a little bit. Prejudice is another one, though. One of my favorite things, and by favorite I mean I hate it, is when people say, Brian, I'm not prejudiced, but have you ever heard something like that? And then it goes on. And I'm always like, man, you got to stop talking right now. Because it's usually something like, I'm not prejudiced, but I was in Target the other day, and there was a guy, and he was from the Middle East, and he was just standing there buying chips. And I'm always like, why do you got to tell me where he's from? Right? Is that a vital part of this story? Is that he was from a different country buying chips? Because since I've lived in Utah, I'm not from Utah. Since I've lived here, it's been a while. No one has ever said to me, Brian, I'm not prejudiced, but there was a white Mormon rich man standing in line at Target buying chips. No one has ever said that to me. How come? Yeah, he is considered the norm. And he's the one that everybody else we feel like we have to identify, right? Because they're not the norm. But prejudice, y'all, what does the word mean? Let's just break it down. Prejudge. How many of you prejudge every single day of your lives? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you started prejudging about 35 minutes ago when I stood up here? And you're like, this guy? Really? I don't know about that, right? We prejudge all the time. Prejudging, prejudice isn't the problem. But the thing is we, in my opinion, are fighting the wrong battles. We are so obsessed with convincing ourselves that we are good people. And we know that good people can't be prejudiced. So therefore, I'm not prejudiced. And we're fighting a battle that is unwinnable. We are prejudiced. You just got to deal with that. That's not what's bad. What's bad is what we do with those prejudices. If I walk into Target, I see someone who's culturally different from me, guess what? I get thoughts. But the difference between me and maybe someone else is I will stop myself and I will be like, dang it, why did I just think that? What is going on in my life that would make me think that about someone that I don't even know? Now, I don't go up to that person and say, hey, man, sorry, I just have this really prejudiced thought about you, just want to talk it out with you. I don't do that, right? But I will stop myself and try to analyze what's going on that would make me think that about someone that I don't know, and what can I do to change it, right? Now, I get it. It's hard work. You should feel sorry for me. I do this all the time. It's exhausting. But in my opinion, it's worth it. Those things are worth it if we're ever going to be able to get over these conflicts and have meaningful conversations with people. Because what prejudice does is it leads to stereotyping. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. I'm going to share some quotes from him in just a second. But he talks about how a lot of us, what we do is we stereotype subconsciously. We don't even do it consciously. So I walk into Target and I see someone who's different from me, and I don't even realize that I put a label on that person. I don't even realize that I'm thinking certain things about that person, and I don't know them, right? I just accept them as truth. And so what Malcolm Gladwell says is, if you don't want to do that anymore, then you've got to train yourself to learn how to recognize those prejudices when they come up. And don't beat yourself up about having them, just learn to recognize them so that you can push back. So this is what happens. Read the title of this research study. And by the way, I will say this is not a one-off. There are many, many studies like this. This is only one example. That's why I show it. If this was only a one-off, I wouldn't show it. But after you've thrown up a little bit in your mouth, after reading the title, what did this study look at? In your own words, someone. What's that? Say it louder. Yeah, so can you rate someone's intelligence based on what they're dressed, how they're dressed? Obviously, you'd be like, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. Well, 159 teachers say otherwise. So this was done in Ohio with 750 students. They brought them out, 159 teachers, rated their intelligence, and the only thing they knew about them is what they looked like. And so if you look at the second bullet point, or sorry, the last one, results indicated perception of intelligence and academic achievement are influenced by dress. Significant differences were found in perception of intelligence and scholastic ability for both student and teacher subjects based on clothing styles and the sex of the model. And newsflash, the implications of this are huge. If you think that your professors here at UVU don't do this to you, you're kidding yourself. We do this to each other all the time. But here's the kicker. I don't believe that those 159 teachers woke up that morning and said, how can I be racist today? Like, I just really want to go out and be racist. I think that they're probably good people. And they got, I don't know. We don't pay teachers enough. So maybe they gave them a bonus to do this research study. That's what I'm hoping in my heart. I can't believe that we found 159 teachers to do this. But I believe that they probably are doing it at a subconscious level, right? So bias. We are biased. We have bias. We bring our biases into our interactions with other people. Those biases make us see others as intelligent, less intelligent, normal, not normal, okay to talk to, etc., right? It's not about not being biased. It's about learning to recognize those. When we work with others who think differently, we're able to see that and we understand what is going on, not because it is right or wrong, but because it's just where we came from. Y'all, I'm sorry, you're not right. Neither am I. We're all just figuring out our realities. And so much of our conflict, when we talk with others and try to work with and understand others, comes from a place where I think I'm right, and the inevitable corollary is that you must be wrong. How many of you have seen this TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story? This is my favorite TED Talk of all time. This is a woman by the name of Chimamanda Adichie. She's from Nigeria. And she talks about growing up in Nigeria and then moving to the United States. And when she moved to the United States, she quickly realized that people had a single story about her being from Africa. She went to college, and her roommate, one of the first questions her roommate asked her was, so obviously you don't know what an oven is, so how do you cook food? Chimamanda grew up in a middle to upper class home. Both her parents were professors, I believe, at a college in Nigeria. She had actually maids and house workers. She knew what an oven was, for just FYI. Another question her roommate asked her was, can I listen to your tribal music? And she was confused when Adichie pulled out her cassette tape of Mariah Carey, because that's what she listened to. Now, by the way, for you young people, a cassette tape is how we used to listen to music. It came in a little rectangular form. We would put it into a machine and push play, and that's how we listened to things, okay? But this person had a single story about what it was like in Africa and put it all on her. So Adichie says this. So that is how you create a single story. You show people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. Stories can break the dignity of a people. But I love this one. Stories can also repair that broken dignity of allowing ourselves and others to tell stories. And then she also says the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, it's that they are incomplete, right? And so she advocates for us to do more in order to understand people who are different, that we've got to get more information. This is exactly what Malcolm Gladwell is talking about in his book, Blink. By the way, how many of you have heard of Malcolm Gladwell? You know who I'm talking about, okay? He's a very accomplished author, used to be a journalist for the Washington Post. Now he's written several books, and he has a very popular podcast. But in his book, Blink, he says this: making snap decisions about situations and people is what he calls thin slicing. So that example of me walking into Target, seeing someone who I don't know, who's of a different culture, and I have a snap judgment about them, he calls that thin slicing. And he says that these decisions are made unconsciously and people cannot articulate the rationale behind them. He says our first impressions are generated by our experiences and our environment. Then he says we can alter those, but we have to be willing to change our experiences, okay? So I'm going to give you an example of that before I read this one. So let's say I hate basketball, and I hate watching basketball. I don't know why I'm picking on basketball today. There's no thing with basketball with me. I'm just picking on it for whatever reason. But let's say I don't like basketball. I don't like basketball players. I don't like watching basketball, etc. And then one day I'm walking down the sidewalk, and a very tall, athletically dressed person is walking towards me, bouncing a basketball. Where is my mind probably going to go? I don't like that guy. And I might even take a step over. There's actually a whole book on this called Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. People just take a step over when they walk past people that they don't feel comfortable with, right? I might automatically dislike this person and I don't even know them, okay? So then what do I do about that? So what Chimamanda Adichie says is that we've got to be able to have more stories in order to change that narrative. This is what Malcolm Gladwell says about it. Whoops, sorry, this one. If you are a person who would like to treat people who are different from you, by the way, those are my little add-ins in the brackets, as equals in every way, who would like to have a set of associations with people who are different from you, that are as positive as those that you have with people who are like you, then it requires more than a simple commitment to equality. In other words, it's not good enough just to say, oh, no, I'm a good person, therefore I don't have prejudice. I'm a good person, so I like everybody. That's great, but that's not enough. Gladwell says if we want to have more positive associations, we are going to have to. It says it requires that you change your life. so that you are exposed to people who are different from you on a regular basis and become comfortable with them and familiar with the best of their culture, so that when you want to meet, hire, date, talk, or teach a member of a person who is different from you culturally, and I love this part of the sentence, you are not betrayed by your hesitation or discomfort. So, basketball guy walking towards me, I'm freaked out, I don't like him, I pass him, and I'm like, dang it, that's probably not good for me. What would Malcolm Gladwell say I need to do so that that doesn't happen next time? Yeah. Absolutely. I might have to go hang out at the basketball court. I might have to get some friends that play basketball. I might have to, heaven forbid, watch March Madness or whatever, right? So that when I see the next basketball player, I am not betrayed by my hesitation or discomfort. I've got more information to go on so that I can have a better, more positive experience with that. There's another concept related to this known as the fundamental attribution error. I love this concept. I'll just kind of give you an example that illustrates it. Let's say I'm walking down the sidewalk one day, and across the street, there's a lady, and I see her trip on the sidewalk. What is my first thought? Don't be nice, y'all. What's your first thought? Come on. What? Clumsy. You might all be like, learn how to walk, lady. Right? Okay. Next day, you're walking on that side of the street, and guess what you do? Trip on the sidewalk. What's your first thought? Yeah, stupid sidewalk. Who built a sidewalk like that? I'm going to sue someone. Right? You don't think that you're clumsy. How come? Yeah, you know you. You got all kinds of other stories in your head about you, and you know that you don't normally walk around tripping over things. So it can't be that you're clumsy, it's got to be the sidewalk's problem. But isn't it interesting that we don't assign the same kind of attributes to others that we don't know as well? We're quicker to assign negative things to other people. Someone who voted differently from me must be because they're an idiot, right? Or something like that. Instead of, well, I wonder why they voted that way. Is there something I can learn from them to make myself even better, to understand their perspective, right? Now, tripping over the sidewalk might be a dumb thing, but can you imagine doing this in a meaningful context, right? For example, let's say you're a teacher and you have two students, and we'll call one Tom and one Betty. And Tom is a straight A student, and he always turns his homework in, and he is awesome, and he gets A's on his tests. And Betty, not so much. Betty comes from a difficult home life. She takes care of her younger siblings every night because her mom works 3 jobs, and she never turns in her homework, and she doesn't do well on my test. So Friday rolls around, and I have a test day, and both Tom and Betty fail the test. What might I think about Tom? Yeah, what's going on with Tom? I wonder if I should call home, check on him, see if things are okay. This is not normal. I'm going to figure out a way to have him retest. What might I think about Betty? Typical Betty, right? Expected this. Now, you don't know anything about Tom and Betty and how they prepared for that test, but we've got attributes that we are putting onto them with very limited information, and we do that all the time. Right? So learning to check that. Now, where do these attributes come from? Pierre Bourdieu, sociologist that wrote largely in the 80s and 90s, talks about our cultural identities and what makes us view the world the way we do. He talks about these concepts known as habitus, cultural capital, field, trajectory, and standpoint. And I do a whole exercise activity with my students on these terms, where I have my students do a deep dive into what their own habitus is and their own cultural capital. So just in a nutshell, habitus, by the way, don't call Pierre Bourdieu to check this. This is my interpretation, and my interpretation is better. So this is how I define habitus. The cultural characteristics that we are born with, that we don't necessarily choose. So I'm born in to certain things. Like, let's say my parents were super religious and I'm born into that religion, that becomes my habitus. That's how I see the world. And I see the world as right or wrong based on that, right? A really cheesy one could be how to set the table. If I asked everybody in this room, and I've done this many times, to draw the correct and proper way to set a table, what do you think would happen in this room of 50 people? We'd have almost 50 different answers. Maybe not quite, but we would have a lot of different answers. And if I asked you, why do you set the table that way? Most of you would reply something like, I don't know. That's just how we did it. That's habitus. Habitus is often we do things in our lives that we can't even articulate why. It's just the way it's always been done. Cultural capital is different than habitus. Cultural capital can be acquired characteristics and attributes. So maybe I go to my best friend's house when I turn 6, and I go in for dinner, and Jared's mom sets the table differently than my mom. She puts the fork on the other side of the table. I'm like, what the heck is going on around here? But you kind of like it. So you go home that night and you're like, Mom, guess what? I found a new way to set the table. And your mom freaks out on you. She's like, that's not how we do it in this house. We will never set the table like this. And if you ever try that again, you're going to be grounded. All right, maybe we don't do that on setting the table. But can you imagine coming home and saying to your parents, I think I'm going to be a different religion now. My boyfriend is a Catholic, and I would like to leave the Baptist religion and join him. Those conversations don't tend to go very well, right? But if you decided to take that route, you would be leaving your habitus a little bit, and you would be acquiring new characteristics which become your cultural capital. Here's the point of all these. And I won't go into those in any more detail today just because of time, but we see the world as right or wrong based on those cultural characteristics, and most of us are walking around and we've never even done a deep dive into ourselves to understand why we even have those points of view. Most of us are walking around just saying, well, that's just the way it's done. That's just the right way. Without being like, okay, why do I even think that? And is there a different way of thinking? And so when we carry those into conversations with people, so this last point right here, the recognition of physical and racial differences does not mean that we are racist or prejudiced, but we're recognizing those differences, and I can learn to value them, right? Michael Scott tried to do that in that episode of The Office that I was talking about. He tried to claim that they were a very advanced office and that they did not see color. Okay, and if you remember this episode, the very next thing that he says is super telling. He says, we're a very advanced office. We do not see color. Stanley, when I look at you, I don't see you as another race. What's the problem with that? If anyone watches The Office, Stanley is the only African-American person in the office. He is saying, I don't see you as another race, while he is literally saying he's another race, right? So we cannot pretend that we don't see difference. And by the way, we shouldn't. Those differences matter. They are important to us and they are important to other people. And if we're ever going to be effective communicators with others who are different, we've got to understand why we are the way we are and learn to value other people. I love this visual. Just take that in for a second. These two civilizations are basically the same thing, but they each view the other as horrible, right? They live in the same freaking castle. They drive the same boat, but the other ones are infidels and we are the holy ones. How often do we do that in our lives? If you are an Oklahoma Sooner, I've done that to you in my life. I'm sorry. I apologize. Publicly apologize. I would like to learn more about your Sooner culture. Maybe someday. Not today. But do we not cast those things on others, right? And this is a great example of looking at difference as a deficit. So when we encounter people who are different from us, do we see them from an advantage standpoint or an asset-based lens or a deficit lens? I'm about to read you a description of a people called the Amorites by another people called the Sumerians in 3000 BC. Here we go. Remember, it's the Sumerians talking about the Amorites. A tent dweller, buffeted by wind and rain, he knows not prayers. With the weapon he makes the mountain his habitation. Contentious to excess, he turns against the land. Knows not to bend the knee, eats uncooked meat, has no house in his lifetime, is not brought to burial when he dies. Now remember, this is the Sumerians talking about those weirdos on the other side of the mountain, right? So my question is, what does this description of the Amorites actually tell us more about the Sumerians than it does the Amorites? What are some conclusions that you can make about the Sumerians? Anyone? Yeah. And why would you say that? Like, what makes you think that? Exactly, because if they did the same thing that the Amorites did, they wouldn't be talking about it, right? So they're basically saying, look at those guys, they don't even cook their meat. They are so weird. Was there another hand over here? Yeah.
I think this just says they have an opportunity to grow, that they have an opportunity to be curious.
Oh, man, so you're going to where I want you to go, all right? That's not how I'm reading it first, but yes. That is how we can flip the script on this, right? So, like, how could we look at this description rather than from a deficit lens, but from a growth mindset, right? Maybe it's cool to be able to eat your meat without cooking it, right? Maybe it's a time saver. So you're telling me you can kill the animal and eat it right there and not have to do all this other stuff? Wow, that's pretty cool. But it depends on our mindset, right? And how we're viewing that difference. If we see it as a deficit, we're going to not like that group of people. If we see it from an asset lens, then that growth, right? How can I learn from it? How can I be a better person? When we see others or want to communicate with others who are different, how do we start that? Do we approach that with a mindset of, they're broken, let me fix them? Do I go into a situation where they're different and say, I cannot wait to see a different way of thinking, and I authentically want to learn from it, right? It goes kind of into the conversation of what is the difference between sympathy and empathy. There's a really good little RSA clip from Brene Brown on empathy. And she talks about the difference, what is the difference, right, between sympathy and empathy. And I think a lot of times when we approach these kinds of conversations, we're going in maybe with sympathy. It's like, oh man, I know that you're broken, but let me just, hear you talk. I'll be here for a second. Empathy is much different, right? Empathy is, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. I can't relate to the way you worship, but I can listen. And I can try to understand why you think that's important, right? Or whatever, what other kind of difference we have, right? So we've got, Lynn, what am I going to? $3:45, okay. Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to do this one because you might disagree with everything that I have said so far, and that's fine. I'm totally fine with that, except you cannot disagree with the next thing I'm about to say because it is not up for debate. It is factual, so there will be no dissension on this. Pearl Jam is the greatest band to ever exist in the history of the world. Okay, that is fact, and it is not debated. Okay, so Pearl Jam has a song, and they quote, "Born on third thinks he got a triple." Now, Eddie Vedder did not coin this term, but he does it the best, okay? So the song is called Bush Leaguer. It is about someone in our society, we don't need to get into specifics, that they didn't like at the time. This album came out in 2000, and arguably the worst album of Pearl Jam, but that's okay because it's still good, all right? So on Riot Act, there's this song called Bush Leaguer, and it goes like this. A confidence man, why so beleaguered? He's not a leader, he's a Texas leaguer. Swinging for the fence, got lucky with a strike, drilling for fear, makes the job simple, born on third, thinks he got a triple. Okay, what do we mean? We know that phrase, you've heard it probably. What does that mean? Yeah. Exactly. So this is a game of baseball. If you're not familiar with it, this is the person on offense. And the first thing that person is trying to do is get where? On base, which he goes to first base first, and he's got to go to second, third, and then how does he score or win the game? How do we win the game in baseball? You got to go all the way home, right? Some people, we know that we are not all born equal. Right? We don't all have the same resources. We don't have all the same opportunities as other people. That's okay-ish. You know, we have in our society ways for us to do different things. But this idea that we all have the same, that we all have the same opportunity, so if you're not successful, it must mean that you're lazy or you didn't want to work, right? That is very problematic to me because in this quote, he's talking about someone that didn't have to stand at the plate maybe necessarily to get on base. His path was already kind of laid out in a different way. Now, I have not been able to have a conversation with Eddie Vedder about this. I dream about having conversations with Eddie Vedder all the time, and when I do, I will ask him this question. But I do not think that he will disagree with me. I don't believe he is saying that it is bad to be born on third. What is bad? Yeah, thinking that you're there because of all your hard work or everything you did, because the problem is if I'm standing on third, I have a problem with the person on home plate. I'm like, what is taking you so long? Just come over here. It's way better over here. You're doing it wrong if you're still standing at home base or whatever you call it, home thing, plate, right? You got to do more. Not realizing that, well, maybe I had different opportunities that got me here. Maybe my habitus was different. Maybe my cultural capital was different. How can I be empathetic to the person still trying to get on base and understand where she's coming from rather than getting upset with her for still being there? Right? It's a different conversation. So there's different ways that we can do this. One is a theoretical paradigm known as culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally relevant thinking. And these are the dimensions of it. One is validating. When we meet people who are different from us, do we validate those cultural differences? Do I look at them as strengths? Another one is comprehensive. No one in here is only made up of one identity. We all have multiple identities that make us who we are in our culture. And so when we interact with people who are different, be careful not to focus on one of those cultural identities and judge the person completely off of that. We are comprehensive human beings. Multidimensional, that kind of gets into teaching, and we teach from different perspectives. One of my favorite examples of this is I was talking about this one time with a group of students, and I had one student from England, and she said, oh man, this reminds me of what you guys call the Revolutionary War. And we're all like, okay. And she goes, yeah, in our textbooks, it basically was a paragraph that said, oh, there were some islands we didn't want anymore, so we let them have it. And she's like, in your textbooks, it's like the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world. And there's chapters after chapters about it. It's not that one's right or wrong, it's just a different perspective, right? And so if you're an educator, can you teach from different perspectives? And then empowering. Can I empower the people that I work with or people that I'm interacting with who are different from me? Rather than sitting there and trying to judge them or catch them in a lie or whatever, can I empower that and learn from it? And then the other two, we don't have time to get into them, but transformative and emancipatory are two other ways to look at it. So based on all of these cultural characteristics, the ones that we're born with, the ones that we acquire, we view the world as we do, right or wrong. We have our perspectives. We can choose to interact with others and accept them for just being different, but it is up to us. And it is not super easy. But our perspectives are based on our experiences. If I were to show you this in your minds, how would you fill in these blanks? Don't say anything out loud yet, just quickly go through. This is a test. You will be graded on it later. Okay, let's go. Let's see how you did. Just, you can just call it out. The question that, parents, anything else? People, okay. Face as they raise children from infancy to adult life are not easy to. Okay, so far you've gotten one right. Not doing very good. Both father and, okay, incorrect. Gosh, you guys can become concerned with health problems such as, okay, thank you. By the way, prior to 2020, never did someone say COVID to this. Since 2020, I cannot tell you how many times I get COVID. I don't understand. It's weird. All right. You're wrong, all of you, almost completely. Now, I'm going to give you one contextual clue, and I'm going to give you a minute to see if you can do something different. You can talk to a neighbor if you want to. Okay. Did it change? What do you got? So the question that, anyone? Poultry, man, y'all. People, come on. Poultry people, obviously. Face as they raise. Did you guys get chickens? From incubation to adult life are not easy to answer. So that was the one that you had right before. Both, not fathers and mothers, obviously. Farmers and merchants become concerned when health problems such as coccidiosis. How did y'all not know that? Did anyone grow up on a farm? Yeah, do you know what coccidiosis is? No, okay. I forget. I looked it up, but I can't remember. Anyway, so my point here is that it changes based on more information. Were you all wrong with this one? Were you wrong? Were they incorrect answers? No. They were for my test. And that's what we do in school all the time, right? We try to trick you with what we want you to think instead of what you could answer, right? Just kidding. Sorry, professors. But we bring into those kinds of things our experience. So if you did grow up on a chicken farm, you might have been able to cruise through this. This might not have been any help at all having a chicken on there, depending on what your context is, right? And what your experience is. But we carry those into our interactions. Last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll see if there's any questions. We have a saying in my home. And I'll tell you where this came from, but this is the saying. People aren't weird, people are different. And, it's really important to screen the and, different is good. And this happened when my son was about 5 or 6. I remember it vividly. We were sitting on the couch in our living room watching TV. Embarrassingly, it was the Disney Channel, and even more embarrassing than that, it was High School Musical. Okay, so we're sitting there watching High School Musical, and my son says, "Dad, that guy is weird. Look at his hair." And he was talking about, I don't know what his name is in the show, Corbin Blue in the show. His name is Chad. He has an afro haircut. And I fell off the couch. I turned the TV off. I felt like I had been stabbed in the back. My own flesh and blood. What is he doing calling someone weird that he doesn't even know? So I call the family into the living room. I'm like, we're having a critical race dialogue. And my partner, Katrina, who's here today, was like, I don't know if they're old enough for a critical race dialogue. I'm like, they're old enough. Because my twins at the time were like 3, and Mac was 6. And we sit down, and we come up with this. This was my 6- and 3-year-old version of critical difference. Can we look at people who are different from us as just that and not wrong or weird? One of the proudest moments of my life as a parent was a few weeks later. After this thing, I'm walking down the street holding my son's hand. He goes, Dad, look, that guy over there, he's weird. Different, huh? And I go, yeah, and he's like, ugh, different is good, because by that time I had made him say it like 100 times, right? So it became an eye roll thing. But it became a really important thing in our home. Can we authentically look at people who disagree with us, who are different, and look at them as a good thing rather than an obstacle for us to overcome? And that's my hope for us. Thank you all.
We have time for about one question, so who would like to jump in?
They're like, I don't want to get that guy going again.
Anyone?
How do we engage with this work when we're working like with people whose differences in like political opinion directly affect the rights and well-being of other people?
Yeah, that's a super, super important question. Thank you very much. And I've had this discussion with a lot of colleagues, and that is a really hard thing to navigate, because there are perspectives that are hurtful and damaging to other people, and we can't allow that if we want to create safe spaces. It is a struggle that I have in this work all the time, right? Do we validate people only to a certain point? And I'm like, well, I validate everybody, but not you, because you don't validate others. Or can I create a space for that person to still grow with me? I believe that in order to do this, it requires that that person also be willing to grow. Right? So like if you are engaging with someone who's like, nope, I am right, you're wrong, and I'm not going to budge, I don't think we can do a lot of good work there. But as long as that person is willing to be like, well, what if I am seeing it wrong? Then I think it is important to be able to engage with that. But we do have to create safe spaces. And there are plenty of spaces where these dialogues happen that aren't safe for people. So as a facilitator in this work, it is very difficult. It's very, very difficult to facilitate this work well, because you got to create safe spaces, but then to do that sometimes to allow people to express. A lot of one-on-one work with individuals like that, so that others who might not feel safe don't have to be kind of there. But you do have to have some reciprocity, I think. Really good question. I don't have super awesome answer, because it's so contextual and it's so dependent on people. But something definitely we have to consider and think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay,
We
thanks,
appreciate
everyone.
that.